Hey guys, welcome back. Yes, we are back to gameplays. It's always fun to try something new, but you can't beat the classics. As for the game, it was about value and threat evaluation, and making sure you used all your available resources. But before we roll the intro, I wanted to give a big shout out to Dusty Cupboards, who won this week's Twitter question. Also, I wanted to let you know he runs an interesting MTG YouTube channel called N Magic Card, where he does deep dives on specific MTG cards in the weirdest way possible. And you guys should check him out. But guess it's time to let the intro roll. Alright, block there, kill that. Oh, that is trample. Guess I'm just dead on board. But who is joining us at the table? Well, first off is Nano Jade, who has brought Sisay, Weatherlight Captain. This is a 5-color Super Friends deck that aims to use Sisay as a great way to search out combo pieces or find key hate pieces to shut his opponents down. Next up is Jargle, who has brought a new commander to the table, Kalamax. This was a pre-con commander that had a lot of sweet value and quite a few combos, and I'm definitely excited to see this Teamer Spellslinger deck in action. Third up is MTG Loots, who's back on Malcolm Tymna. This artifact stacks deck's aim is to lock the board down and whittle his opponents away, while gaining advantage from his commander connecting. He also relies on rule of law effects to really hinder his opponents. And up last is Porf, who is on Meren. This Golgari Reanimator deck uses Meren's powerful reanimation ability to play out of the graveyard and accrue lots of value. This is a Sack Hulk deck that aims to reanimate and sacrifice Protein Hulk as quickly as possible and combo out early. But without further ado, let's get on to the gameplay. Nano starts off the game with a Scrub land. He then plays a Mana Crypt and uses it to cast his commander, Sisay, and passes after that. Jargle plays a tropical island into a carpet of flowers and passes after that. Loots plays and cracks a misty rainforest for an underground sea and follows it up with a Mox Diamond, pitching a Cave of Koilos. He uses this to play a Dark Confidant but is done after that. Porf plays a forest and, not wanting to be left in the dust, casts a Deathrite Shaman and ships the turn. Nano starts off his turn by losing his Crypt Trigger and then plays a Bloodstained Mire as land. He heads to combat, swinging Sisay at Loots. Then, on his second main, he cracks the Bloodstained Mire for a Volcanic Island, but passes after that. Jargle starts off by activating the carpet to add 1 green, which he uses on a 3 visits to get a Taiga. He shocks in a Breeding Pool and then casts a Burton Scroll, getting a Force of Will and passing after that. Loots triggers the Dark Confidant, but lucks out by revealing a Flooded Strand. He then plays the Strand and cracks it for Tundra. He finishes his turn by playing his commander, Malcolm. Porf plays a Swamp and then taps 2 for a Priest of Titania. He heads to combat and swings the Elf at Nano, but is done after that. Nano has better luck this time, winning his Mana Crypt trigger. He then shocks in a Breeding Pool and taps 5 for an Oath of Teferi. On ETB, he blinks out the Mana Crypt. Sisay then swings at Porf for 4, and on his end step, the Mana Crypt comes back in. Jargle activates the carpet for 2 red mana and, along with 2 lands, casts Kalamax. He then plays and cracks a Verdant Catacombs for an untapped Stomping Grounds and passes after that. Loots on his turn reveals a Kite Sail Freebooter off the Bob trigger and heads straight to combat. He swings Malcolm at Nano for 2 and gets 1 treasure. On his second main phase, he cracks the treasure to Preordain. He draws and then plays an Ancient Tomb, but has nothing else and passes. Porf starts out by tapping the Priest to cast a Null Rod, which Loots floats a black in response. Porf then moves to combat and Loots uses the black to cast a Vampiric Tutor, putting a card on top. Porf on his second main plays and cracks a Misty Rainforest, but in response, Loots flashes in an Opposition Agent, taking 2 from the tomb. But not wanting a card that shuts down his entire strategy, Nano casts a Force of Will, pitching a Swan Song that he revealed earlier, targeting the Opposition Agent. Jargle is all for the stacks and casts a Dispel, targeting the Force. The Force is countered and the Opposition Agent resolves, with Loots controlling Porf's fetch, which finds him a Bayou. Porf then uses Deathrite Shaman to exile a Misty from Loots' graveyard to cast a Merciless Executioner, with Jargle being the one this time to counter with a Force of Will, pitching Hull Breacher. At this point, unfortunately, an error happens on our part. Both Nano's and Lutz's life totals will become incorrect. While they were announcing their life total changes, they were forgetting to always update them. It's something that we need to be more vigilant on, especially when playing over webcam. I will have updated life totals in the corner, but did want to warn you as these errors do affect the ending of the game. Nano wins his crypt trigger again and plays a Badlands. He then casts a Sylvan Library and follows it up with an Avacyn's Pilgrim. He heads to combat and swings Sisay at Lutz, but is done after that. Jargle has a quick turn as he heads straight to combat, swinging 4 at Nano, which gets blocked by an Avacyn's Pilgrim, and he's done after that. Lutz finally starts taking some damage as he reveals a Necropotence off the Dark Confidant trigger, taking 3 and dropping to 23. He then plays Porf's Stolen Bayou and casts Tymna, taking 2. He then heads to combat, swinging the Opposition Agent at Porf's, Malcolm at Nano, and the Confidant at Jargle. But before damage, Jargle casts and copies a Flame Sweep, with Kalamax gaining a counter and dealing 4 to all creatures, wiping out everything but Kalamax. Lutz is done after that. Porf on his turn plays a Forest and then casts a Mind Blade Render, and finishes his turn with a Caustic Caterpillar. Nano loses his Crypt trigger, taking 3 and dropping to 27. His Sylvan Library triggers and he takes 4 to keep an extra card. He then plays and cracks the Marsh Flats to grab a Savannah, and taps 3 for Amanatu. He uses her +1 ability to draw a card and then put 1 on top. A Thalia Garden of Thraben then gets played and he activates Amanatu again due to the Oath of Teferi, and draws and puts 1 back on top, but passes after that. Hopefully Nano was able to get the value he needed from Amanatu, as Jargle heads Kalamax straight at her to take her out, but passes after that. Lutz starts his turn off with a Tarnished Citadel and then a Kite Sail Freebooter, which on ETB targets Jargle, and snags his Underworld Breach, passing after that. Porf heads straight to combat, swinging the board at Jargle for 2. Porf then loses 1 to draw off the render, and on his second main plays a tapped Overgrown Tomb and finishes it up by casting a Root Maze for 2, thanks to Thalia. Nano loses his Crypt trigger again and triggers the library, taking 4 to keep an extra card. He then taps 3 for a Najeela, and then 2 for a Mystic Remora and passes the turn. Jargle heads straight to combat and swings Kalamax at Lutz for 5, who blocks with his Freebooter, which gets his Breach back. On his second main, he activates the Carpet, and, along with delving and tapping a land, casts a Dig Through Time, which gets copied and Kalamax gets another +1/+1 counter. This triggers the Mystic Remora, and Lutz responds by taking 2 from the tomb, along with an island to cast a Swan Song, targeting the copy. The stacks resolves and Lutz doesn't pay for the fish. Nano Jade ends up drawing 2 cards, with 1 of the digs resolving, and Jargle getting a 2/2 bird. He then plays a Training Center tap and lastly a Spellseeker, which gets a Thrill of Possibility. Lutz has a very quick turn, he plays a tapped City of Brass and passes. Porf starts by swinging the Mind Blade at Lutz, and Najeela triggers, but Nano is not feeling the love and says no warriors for Porfs. Porf then pays a life to draw from the render, and on his second main he plays a tapped Exotic Orchard and then casts his commander Meren. And on his end step, Meren brings the Deathrite Shaman back to his hand. Nano must have pissed someone off as he loses his Crypt trigger again. He doesn't pay for the Remora and he triggers his library. He decides that life is just a resource and keeps an extra card, dropping down to 8. He taps 4 for Narset and -2s her to find a Nature's Will. Then does it again to reveal Utopia Sprawl. He heads to combat, swinging Najeela and a warrior at Lutz. Funnily enough, Porf's Mind Blade Render triggers and he loses a life to draw a card. Nano finishes up his turn by casting a Birds and passes. Jargle heads to combat and swings Kalamax and the 2/2 bird at Narset to take her out. On his second main, he activates the Carpet for 2 red and casts a Thrill of Possibility, pitching a Mox Diamond. Kalamax triggers, getting a +1/+1 counter, and he draws a total of 4 cards, but passes after that. Lutz buys into the whole disregarding your life total as he taps 3 black and a colorless for a Necropotence, taking 1 from the City of Brass. He then pays 4 life, dropping to 9, and passes as he refills his hand. Porf plays a tapped Verdant Catacombs and heads to combat. He swings the render at Lutz and Meren at Jargle. Jargle chumps the Meren with his Spellseeker, while Lutz takes it, and Porf pays 1 life to draw off the render. On his second main, Porf pays 1 for the Deathrite Shaman, and at his end step, Meren brings a Merciless Executioner back to his hand. Nano drops pretty low again as he loses his Crypt trigger again, and doesn't take any extra cards from the library trigger. He enchants his Savannah with the Utopia Sprawl, and then names green. During combat, he swings Najeela at Lutz and a warrior token at Jargle. Najeela triggers and he gains 2 more warriors, which heads at Lutz. Porf's Mind Blade triggers again and he loses 1 to draw. Nano then activates Najeela for lifelink and an extra combat, swinging with everything. He gains 4 more warriors, so at the end, 2 warriors head at Porf's, Najeela and 2 warriors at Jargle, and 3 warriors at Lutz, which should have killed him if he was taking an accurate total of his life. Porf blocks a token and the Mind Blade triggers again, drawing him a card, and Nano gains 10 life and passes after that. Jargle starts his turn with a tapped Flooded Strand and heads to combat. He swings Kalamax at Nano, and on his second main he adds 2 blue from the carpet and casts a Gilded Drake. He takes control of Meren, and on his end step, Meren gets Spellseeker back to hand, and Lutz flashes in an Aven Mind Sensor, taking 2 off the tomb. Lutz skips his draw due to Necro and plays a tapped Scalding Tarn. He casts a Merchant Scroll, losing 2 from the Ancient Tomb, and finds and casts a Chain of Vapor, targeting Porf's Null Rod. Porf sacrifices the Catacomb and copies it to bounce Meren, and Jargle copies it, sacrificing his Flooded Strand and getting a counter on Kalamax and bouncing the Gilded Drake. No one copies it after that, and Lutz Necros for 2. Porf starts off by tapping 6, including the Deathrite Shaman, exiling one of Lutz's lands, and casts a Massacre Worm. The worm resolves, and Nano and Lutz die for real this time. Porf heads to combat and swings the board at Jargle, who doesn't block and takes 2. Porf then draws and loses 1 from the render. He then passes and discards down to 7, notably discarding a Void Winnower. Jargle speeds straight to combat and swings Kalamax at Porf's, who takes 8. On his second main, Gyro casts a Spellseeker, who finds a Reap, and then Gyro pays 2 life for a Git Probe, and Porf shows his hand. Jargle then casts a Gilded Drake and swaps it for a Massacre Worm. He passes and also has to discard due to hand size. Porf starts his turn early by Vampiric Tutoring during his upkeep, losing 2 life. He finds a card and then draws it. Porf then casts a Forgotten Gem of a card, Ritual of the Machine, sacrificing the Caterpillar and losing 2 health from the Massacre Worm to take control of Kalamax, but passes after that. Jargle starts by casting a Wild Growth on his Breeding Pool, and then an Arcane Signet, which comes into play tapped due to the Root Maze. He heads to combat and swings the worm at Porf's, who chumps with a Mind Renderer and loses 2 from the worm trigger. Jargle is done after that. Porf plays a tapped Nurturing Peatland and swings the Drake and Kalamax at Jargle, who chumps with a Spellseeker on the Kalamax. He takes 3 from the Drake, and on his second main phase, Porf plays and sacrifices a Merciless Executioner, losing 2 from the worm, with Jargle sacking the worm. Porf finishes his turn with a Null Rod, and on his end step, Jargle Cyclonic Rifts the Gilded Drake back to his hand. Jargle has a quick turn, casting a Gilded Drake and swapping it with his tapped Kalamax and passes. Porf heads straight to combat and swings the Drake at Jargle, and on his second main phase, sacks the Drake to a Diabolic Intent, and in response, Jargle casts Reap, copying it and gaining a +1/+1 counter on Kalamax. He gets back the Spellseeker and the Dig Through Time. The intent resolves and Porf finds a card and follows it up with a Mind Slicer. Not wanting to lose his hand, Jargle tries and counterspell it, but Porf has the answer when he responds with a Veil of Summer, casting it off the Deathrite Shaman. The Veil resolves and Porf draws a card. The counterspell is ineffective and the Mind Slicer resolves, with Porf passing after that. Jargle begins by casting a Spellseeker, which tutors up a Mystical Tutor. He follows this up with a Dockside Extortionist, producing 2 tapped treasures, and passes after that. Porf starts off by casting a Viscera Seer, and luckily for him it resolves, to which he follows it up with an Elvish Mystic and Meren. Surprised to see everything resolve, he casts a Dance of the Dead, targeting Void Winnower, and Jargle responds with a Mystical Tutor, finding a Nexus of Fate. Porf then moves to combat and gets blocked by the Spellseeker. He finishes his turn by sacrificing the Elvish Mystic to get an experience counter and a Scry 1. And at his end step, Meren triggers and grabs the Mind Blade Renderer. On Jargal's turn, after he draws, Porf sacks the Mind Slicer to the Viscera Seer. He scries 1, gets a Meren trigger, and the Mind Slicer's death trigger causes everyone to discard their hand, with Jargal respawning with a Beast Within on the Void Winnower, giving Porf a 3/3 Beast and another experience counter. The stack resolves and everyone discards, with Jargal having to pass after that. Porf starts off with an Animate Dead on his Merciless Executioner, with the Merciless Executioner and Dockside getting sacrificed. Gaining another experience counter for Meren, Porf passes to his end step, having Meren bring back the Executioner again. This forces Jargal to sack Kalamax, with the Executioner also going back to the bin and gaining another experience counter. Jargal draws, but doesn't like what he sees as he plays a Bird of Paradise and passes. And at his end step, Porf cracks his Peatland to draw and uses the Deathrite Shaman to exile Spellseeker, making Jargal lose 2 life. Porf goes straight to combat and swings the board. Jargal has the birds block the render and take 7, and Porf then casts an Occam Adversary. Moving to his end step, Porf has Meren bring back the Mind Slicer. And after Jargal's draw step, Porf sacrifices the Slicer to force everyone to discard their hand, and not seeing any way out of the game, Jargal concedes. Game review. Boy, this one turned out to be a long game. In total, it was 15 turns. But it really shows that in grindier games such as these, life totals do matter. And I am sorry that we did not keep an accurate track of everyone's life total, but it does show that while normally life is a resource, you do have to keep in mind, without it, you are gone from the game. I think Porf did an excellent job of controlling the board and not overextending. It really shows the value this deck has and the power a non-blue deck can have in CEDH. But question for the viewers, have your games been going long? It might just be our particular meta changing, but it feels like I'm seeing more and more stacks slowing the game down. But either way, let me know in the comments down below. Hey guys, thanks for making it to the end of the video. I just wanted to let you know that we have a TCG affiliate link, and if you ever see a card you want to try or are inspired to brew something new, use our link when purchasing and we'll receive a small portion of the sale. This is a great way to support the channel, and if you enjoyed the gameplay, please leave a like and subscribe, as it really helps us keep making videos. And remember, never give up, even if you're dead on board. I'll see you guys later.